We are live from Israel, where we have been reporting from the epicenter of the war zone. Israel is getting ready for its ground offensive into Gaza as the world is urging attention on the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding inside Gaza. I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo story. Through this week, we have been reporting from both borders of Israel, the border with Gaza and the border with Lebanon, as the Hamas and the Hezbollah are both engaged in conflict with the Israeli military. The Israeli military has declared that its ground offensive into Gaza will be quote unquote soon. The Israeli defense minister, in a statement, has actually said that Israeli troops will be able to see the inside of Gaza very soon. But in the meantime, Israel's war offensive is complicated by the fact that even as it amasses tanks and troops at its southern border, at its northern border, the Iran backed group Hezbollah, which is based out of Lebanon, is firing anti tank missiles into Israel. We've been reporting from both borders, this even as world leaders try their best to de escalate this war offensive. And keep in mind that while Israel has a right to retaliate for the terror attack that Hamas inflicted on it, there are hundreds of thousands of civilian lives that have nothing to do with Hamas that are at stake inside Gaza. To talk about what's happening, what the Hamas might do, could do next. Remember, two American hostages have been released after the intervention of Qatar. I want to bring up on the program one of the world's foremost experts on Hamas. These are the two American hostages that have been released. But I want to bring up today Paola Caridi. She's with us now, and I want to just show our audience the book that she has written, where she chronicles Gaza as among the most desperate places on the planet. Her book is called Hamas. Can I just look at the book again? Her book is called Hamas, From Resistance to Government. And thank you very much, Ms. Karidi, for your time. And I want to start by asking you your overall sense of the situation. We have Israel on the one hand preparing for a massive ground incursion. We have the Hamas reportedly in underground tunnels, a network that it is assiduously built up over the years. And then we have hundreds of thousands of Gazans who are going to suffer in unspeakable ways, just as 1,400 Israelis who were killed by the Hamas have. Go ahead with your first comments.
You're right. Civilians are at the center of this war more than any other war in Israel-Palestine. I would say more than any other war elsewhere, as they are the object also of the negotiations and the object inside the war zone. You have also to remember that 70% of the Palestinians inside Gaza, they are refugees. So they are refugees again in these days. And this is really the core issue also in relation with the Arab states around the Gaza Strip, which is not the only place where Hamas rooted its history, as Hamas was born almost 40 years ago from the Palestinian Muslim Brothers. So it's a long story, and I think also the comparison with ISIS will not fit the picture, as ISIS was a top-down phenomenon in a land that was not ISIS land, and Hamas is rooted inside the Palestinian land.
You know, you say that Hamas, the equivalence between Hamas and ISIS is misplaced because of the difference in how they originated. But if you see some of these horrible images, and we can play some of them that are fit to show, when we see these images, when we hear in Israel, as reporters have gone in the insides of the kibbutzes, the community places where women and children have been taken, where adults have been tied together, where rapes have been at least alleged and reported. My question to you would be, maybe the origins are different, but the actions, the threat initially by Hamas, that they might even consider executing hostages on camera if Israel attacked them, the language, the nature of the violence, in many ways is what is leading people to compare it with ISIS. How do you respond to that?
That terrorism is terrorism. War crimes are war crimes. So no doubt about this. But if we want to not to understand, but even to put in the picture what is happening today, we can't forget that this is the fifth military operation of Israel on Gaza: 2008, 9, to 2012, 2014, 2021, 2023, because Gaza was closed and blocked for 16 years.
Mhm.
So this is not, of course, this justification. Hamas acted as with terrorism, and there were four war crimes done by Hamas inside Israel on the 7th of October. What about the reaction? The reaction is more than there are almost 4,000 killed inside Gaza, Palestinian killed inside Gaza. This is the reason I'm speaking about civilians
Mhm.
as objects, and also not only objects, a core issue of this war from both sides.
I would agree with that. But I want you to talk a little bit. Your book actually talks about the transition from Hamas into government. And the Hamas did contest elections, but that was many years ago. One of the debates that is ongoing, and a lot of world leaders have been saying, Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. But if you speak to angry Israelis here, as we've been doing, they'll say Hamas could not have existed without the support of the Palestinian people. On the other hand, you've had the eroding authority, the eroding weakening, the consistent weakening of the Palestinian Authority. World leaders have suddenly remembered Mahmoud Abbas, but he has been on the margins of world attention all of these years. When you hear this statement, Hamas does not represent the Gazan people. Do you think that's accurate, or do you think that because many years ago they won an election, they do in fact represent the Gazan people?
Um, Yes, they do represent a part of the Palestinian people. This is correct. I have only to say that the cover you showed to our audience is the previous edition of 2012, and the new one, the subtitle is "From Resistance to Regime."
I was wondering why that was different, and we can just quickly pull up the corrected
No, no
cover.
problem
Yes,
at all.
yes,
It was
yes.
only to underline the subtitle. I
Okay.
mean, the new updated edition is not anymore "From Resistance to Government," but is instead "From Resistance to Regime," because of what you said before. That means, yes, it represents a part of the Palestinian people, not only inside Gaza, not only inside the West Bank, uh, but this is part of the complex picture of this history. For example, we forget that in 2018, there were peaceful protests at the border with Israel. So, not a terrorist attack inside Israel, but at the border inside Gaza. A lot of Palestinians, young Palestinians, they were killed for that peaceful protest. So, inside the Palestinian mind, there are years and dozens of years without a solution about the occupation. The
Mhm.
occupation with with the civilians is the core issue of this history, and the reaction of Hamas and Fatah, they were different in along the story of the Israeli-Palestinian question. If we don't understand this, we can't understand why we are stuck in a war that will not help anybody, nor the Israelis nor the Palestinians.
Yes. May I ask you though? I don't mean to decontextualize the conflict, and of course, it is an age-old conflict. As you said, this is now going to be Israel's fifth such military operation. But talk a little bit about Hamas. You've spent your book is all about Hamas. There are now reports in the global media, credible media organizations that there's the updated cover, by the way, the credible media organizations talking about how Hamas terrorists were sent in on drugs. They were actually drugged before they were sent in to perform the kind of mass scale terror that they inflicted. But their leaders, some of their leaders, continue to sit ensconced in the comfort of Qatar. right? So you send in the foot soldiers, the terrorist foot soldiers, while your so-called leadership sits comfortably in countries like Qatar. What do you think are Hamas's options at this point? I'll come to the civilians in Gaza and their suffering in a moment. But considering Qatar is mediating, considering we've had two American hostages released, considering Israel is determined to go in, what do you think, or how do you think Hamas will might play it from here, Ms. Karidi?
But Hamas, I think, is weakened, has been weakened not only by this operation, but by the fact that the Israeli operation, but by the fact that they did a terrorist attack inside Israel. I don't think that they imagined the size of the killings, of the massacre. Probably they wanted to meet uh, the Israeli soldiers, or some of them wanted to meet the Israeli soldiers, and they found a lack of intelligence, of Israeli intelligence, and on the other side of the border inside Israel. But these are only speculations we are doing. What about the leadership abroad? The leadership abroad is one of the constituencies of the Hamas political structure. So they are not only in Qatar now, they were in Damascus before, they were in Jordan before, because one of the four constituencies, organizational constituencies, is outside Palestine. So this is, I mean, normal for the history of Hamas. But you have also to consider that there is a strong division between the military wing and the political one. The military wing gave the order, but what I suggest in my book, in the updated edition, is that the military wing that along the history of Hamas obeyed to the whole order of the political wing, now is one of the constituencies. Now is the fifth shadow constituency of the organization.
Now, when you say that there's a division between the political and the military wing of Hamas, who will call the shots now?
This is a good question. We don't hear, for example, nothing from Yahya Sinwar. He is the leader of the Gaza Strip, and he was part of the prisoners exchange in 2011 with Benjamin Netanyahu, head of the Israeli government. So really, who is speaking now is the political wing abroad. It's the political bureau, and we really it's there's a fog on what is happening inside Hamas. Of course, there was fog also before, but nowadays it's really very difficult to understand what they would do and what they can do.
Tell me, given that it's so difficult, what can the world do? Because on the one hand, you have Israel that says 200 of our people are still hostage in captivity of Hamas. Hamas has in fact released a video, just one video of a young 21-year-old girl, and in a kind of classic psyops sort of move, made her record a message. On the other hand, you have only two Americans stepping out. Israel will not want to do business with Qatar. It was one of two countries in the world that backed Hamas after the terror attack. What do you see happening next with all your experience?
A disaster, I think. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, but the de-escalation is something I don't see in the following days. And the role of the Arab states would be important, but the West has also to understand that what is important for the Arab states. They don't want to have the Palestinian refugees again as they did in 1948, and they don't want to repeat a defeat as the 1967 defeat. There is a summit in Cairo today, is a peace summit with a lot of Arab leaders, and not only Arab leaders, European ones, and so on and so forth. But really, the de-escalation is the goal, and um, the humanization is really the goal. We have to rehumanize and to give the human beings the human
Yeah.
body and minds. Otherwise, we don't. I mean, what about the following days, weeks, and months? We want to see another Afghanistan inside in the Mediterranean on the Mediterranean shores.
I think that's the question. Do we want to see another Afghanistan on the Mediterranean shores? Meanwhile, this dramatic video released moments ago shows the Hamas releasing those two American hostages. Do you believe, in your experience and understanding of Hamas, that they will release the others, or will they continue to use them as perhaps the only leverage, a bargaining chip that they have?
One of the goals of the terrorist attack inside Israel was to have hostages inside the Gaza Strip in order to exchange as a leverage to the prisoners exchange. There was a prisoners exchange in 2011 for the liberation of Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier, and there were contacts for another prisoners exchange in the last months and years, and Yahya Sinwar was one of the prisoners released 12 years ago. So the prisoners, the hostages, is another part of the picture. I'm sorry to be so complex for
Mhm.
describing this kind of situation, but the hostages exchange is part of the picture.
Yeah. Let me ask you in the end, you've spoken a lot about Gaza being, in your book, one of the most desperate places on the planet. And I'm really struck
Correct.
actually by what you just said. Do we want to see another Afghanistan on the shores of the Mediterranean? And the way it's going, perhaps we're headed there. How do you look at what's happening in Gaza, inside Gaza? Of course, we've seen doctors that have refused to leave. We have seen a very debated but horrific bombing of the Baptist hospital, the Al Ariri hospital inside Gaza. But you've also spoken about this being a place of high population density, an average of 5 children per women, the highest unemployment levels on the planet. When we put these figures to Israelis, they say, well, the Gazans had every opportunity to become like Hong Kong, but they chose to not become like Hong Kong, and so on. You've heard both sides of the debate. Tell our audience a little bit about Gaza itself.
It will never become Singapore as the Israeli narrative put in the last years.
Mhm.
Because when they moved out of Gaza, there were settlements, colonies, Israeli colonies inside of Gaza. When they moved from Gaza in 2005, what they did was only to leave Gaza as it was, and there was already a blockade before the 2007. So it was impossible for Gaza to become a Singapore on the Mediterranean. Gaza, you have to experience Gaza. And I was there many times. You have to experience Gaza. You have to breathe this air full of rubbish burning air. You have to feel the water that is polluted. You have to see the sea, but the sea is polluted. So to fish also, fishes is something that will not fit your body. You have to see the amount of misery and poverty. You have to see the buildings done built with the rubble of the previous military operation. You have to see the church, the St. Porphyrius Church, that was destroyed last night and was one of the oldest churches in the world. I mean, Gaza is now a place of misery, but 1,000 years ago, it was a place of intellectuals, artists, was not a Singapore on the shores. It was a place of culture. 1,000 years ago and 100 years ago too. So we can't think about Gaza as a place of only misery, but we have to think of Gaza as a place with human beings, with desires, with dreams, and with unattained dreams, and it's not the fault of the Palestinian people. It's the fault of politics, it's the fault of both sides, it's the fault of Hamas, it's the fault of the Israeli governments, it's the fault of the people who didn't want peace on the
Yes.
shores of the Mediterranean.
Finally, do you believe that Hamas, weakened by both the Israeli operation and by its act of terror, so that it cannot really claim to resist? You can't represent resistance if you're killing children and raping women. Do you believe the Gazan people will rise up against Hamas, in support of Hamas, or we simply don't know and it depends on what happens next?
Which people?
The
The
Gazan people.
people, yes, the Gazan people, but the Gazan people now they are under bombardment. We can't think about the reaction of the people where we are sitting in our rooms, when we are in a democratic countries and not in a country under occupation. So because many people asked me about why the Palestinians they don't raise up and fight against. It's impossible under occupation.
Hmm.
Do
But
you
what about
see
the
what is
Palestinian
happening about
Authority?
in the West
Where
Bank?
is the Palestinian Authority in all of this?
Bravo. The Palestinian Authority is in the West Bank. It doesn't control the West Bank. The West Bank is a very, very, very tiny place in comparison with with India, with the Indian panoramas and views. It's a very, very tiny place where there are 2 million Palestinians and 750 settlers, colonists, Israeli colonists. So it's a bit complicated to raise up. They did in the West Bank, but it's complicated under occupation, as the West Bank is controlled by the Israeli military. So I mean, when we speak about raise up, there was a popular uprising, peaceful popular uprising in 2021 in Jerusalem. The reaction was a repression.
Yeah. Where do we go from here finally, Paula?
Of course, every war is concluded by a peace. The problem is how long this war will last,
Yeah.
and which kind of peace we want to achieve: a just peace or a normalization, respect for all, or the control, military control, but also political control of the area. The only, the only goal we have to reach is that of a just peace for every and each human being that lives on the land.
Yes, I would absolutely like to end on that note as we wait for aid to come in from the Egypt side into Gaza. Paula, thank you for your conversation. And the one thing I think you said was about the humanization of life. I think it should not be difficult for us to grieve for mothers who have lost their children in Israel, and mothers who have nothing to do with the Hamas and are also losing their children in Gaza, civilian lives caught up in this battle, and that's where our empathy and our attention should be. But I do agree with you. Being on the ground, I think we're headed into a long war. I don't see the potential of de-escalation right now. Thank you very much, Paola Caridi, the author of Hamas: From Resistance to Regime, for talking to us. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Barkha. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Take care.
The same.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.